All right, well, welcome. Hello, and welcome to BHCOE's monthly business development series. Thanks so much for taking the time today to join us for our webinar called Having Tough Conversations with Dr. Ellie Kazemi. I'm Christine Ratcliffe. I'm Quality Assurance Specialist here at BHCOE, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. For those of you who haven't attended one of our webinars, well, welcome. And for those who've been here before, welcome back. We are always so happy to see that these webinars are a useful resource for you, and we're glad that you keep coming back. I am the one who curates the topics for these webinars for our monthly series. So I'm going to put my contact information in the chat window toward the end of the presentation so that you can let me know if you have any suggestions or ideas for what you want to see. Just go ahead and shoot me an email and reach out and let me know what you would like to see in the future. The goal of this series is to help you as business owners, directors, supervisors, access relevant information that can help run your ABA business more effectively, more efficiently, and with an eye for continuous improvement. So today's webinar ties right into how complicated that day-to-day issue can be for supervisors. You know, how do we act with the people that we need to provide feedback to? I've been in the industry a long time myself, so I noticed that organizations easily focus on using ABA strategies with clients, but sometimes struggle with doing that with their peers and their supervisees and even with one another. So this webinar will explore some of those strategies for doing that. Just to give you a little bit of context for those of you who aren't familiar with the BHCOE yet, we are an accrediting body and we provide an accreditation specific to ABA organizations who are committed to continuous improvement and peer review. Accreditation is an important oversight component that allows organizations to be held accountable to a set of standards alongside the individual standards that we have from the BACB. We take a lot of pride in our organizational standards, and in my role, I assist in the creation of the BHCOE Code of Standards, and I also conduct on-site accreditation evaluations myself, along with the other BCBA and BAD evaluators. Our organization was created by behavior analysts and for behavior analysts to make sure that regulation comes from within the field and that we stay unified in what it means to provide quality services. If you're interested in learning more about the accreditation process, feel free to reach out to me or our outreach coordinator, Carla Gross, and I'll put her information in the chat box as well. And take a minute, if you would, to register for next month's webinar with Dr. Becca Tagg, where she'll be talking about reducing RBT burnout. That's another thing I'll put in the chat box for you is a link to register for that. We're excited about this one. So as folks are getting settled in, a few housekeeping notes. Everyone will be muted except for our presenter. You will have the opportunity to send questions throughout the webinar. We will try to work those in at the end of the presentation. Dr. Kazemi will be asking questions throughout, and please feel free to answer those as she asks them so she can see your responses in the chat box. We will be recording this webinar, and we'll send that recording to anybody who's registered and to our regular mailing list. And lastly, you can also find a recording usually about a week after the event in our virtual academy on our BHCOE website, and I'll have a link for that in the chat box as well. Okay, so I think we're ready to get started with Dr. Kazemi. I hope everyone has their lattes or their lunches ready to keep you busy as we're listening. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about our speaker. Dr. Kazemi is a professor at California State University, Northridge, where she founded their ABA master's program. Her applied research interests center around effective strategies for training and supervision. Her publication activities include those topics, as well as ones related to her laboratory research on technology and simulation-based learning, which sounds really cool. That's a future webinar, I think. So she is also the lead author of a handbook for supervision and behavior analysis. and she has received multiple awards for her mentorship and teaching. So she's a fantastic resource for our community and the perfect person to talk to us about delivering difficult feedback. And so with that being said, Ellie, the floor is all yours.
I would love to begin here by talking about feedback, and I actually have some engagement-based slides, so I was hoping to engage the audience by asking that you answer questions when you see the question mark on the slide here. I'd love for us to be able to engage each other here. Does everyone see the slide now? We're good to go? There we go. Okay. I'm wondering if we can kind of begin with how important do you think it is for individuals in leadership positions to know how to give feedback that improves the behaviors of the individuals that they lead? And you can go ahead and use the chat box right there to answer on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, very, very cool. I'm able to see the chat box. Come on, this is happening. Okay. Do you consider yourself in a position of leadership? Is there anyone here who would say no to that? Cool. Excellent. First, let me begin by saying that employees typically find that all employers report it's extremely important that you know how to give feedback that improves the behaviors of the individuals you lead. This is true in any position of leadership, and it looks like everyone here believes that they are in a position of leadership, whether you supervise 1 to 2 people or an entire clinic or an entire hospital. From an organizational behavior management perspective, giving feedback is a supervisor's primary role. It's relevant to all of the aspects of training your staff and employees, and supervisors report using feedback to motivate their staff. And it's also been shown to be effective in improving behavior across many different populations. It's been researched well to improve behavior. So I'd say feedback is the bomb. So why is it that we don't teach emerging leaders more about feedback? And this is really a question I've been asking myself a lot. Reed and Parsons conducted an interesting study where they had a group of individuals who received feedback from them, and then those same individuals were not given any feedback for some time. And how do you think that they responded? Which do you think they preferred, the feedback or the no feedback condition? Yes, you're absolutely right. They preferred the feedback condition, even though that resulted in response effort on their part. They had to work hard to be able to meet the expectations of the supervisors who provided that feedback. Now, what about corrective feedback, which is essentially letting the person know what they did is wrong? How do you think employees respond there? Do you think they tend to prefer or they tend to avoid receiving corrective feedback? Okay. Now we're seeing good answers, and we're seeing some mixed responding here. Let me ask you, what about supervisors? Before I answer the previous question, do they tend to prefer or avoid giving corrective feedback? I love it. One person actually said it also depends on the employee, and I definitely agree with that. Well, Zenger and Folkman have done a study, actually. This is in the Harvard Business Review, and it's public and accessible to everyone. And what they found is that supervisors prefer to give what they call positive feedback, in this case, feedback that is about things that the person's doing well, doing right. And you're completely right. They avoid giving any sort of corrective feedback, or what they call negative feedback. Now, employees, this is pretty interesting, that they prefer receiving positive feedback. This is no surprise. People like to hear that they're doing a good job, that they're meeting expectations. But this one is much of a surprise. They also preferred receiving negative feedback. And that's equivalent to the level at which supervisors would say that they prefer to give positive feedback. And I think that these surprising results have actually been replicated across a few studies. This shows that employees really don't know what they're doing wrong, and they want to know. And to make change or to improve requires that they know from you explicitly what it is that they're doing right or wrong. Now, what percentage of managers do you think are good at giving this sort of feedback? Would you say less than 10%, 50%, or less than 80%? This is very, very interesting. Mixed results there. Some of you got this right. Actually, according to a study done in 2013, which was done by the Mercer Performance Management Survey, they found that only about 6% of managers are good at giving feedback. This means about 94% of the managers or supervisors, and there were healthcare providers in this survey. In addition to, this is a broad survey, so it included folks in manufacturing, but there were healthcare providers in this survey, and it looks like many of them are not good at giving feedback. And I think many of us would agree with this, looking back at the type of supervisors or managers we have dealt with in the past. So I asked myself this question: why do so many supervisors and managers avoid giving tough feedback, and why are we so bad at it? And I'm a behavior analyst. Behavior is determined, so I paid closer attention to things, always wondering why supervisors shy away from giving feedback. And when I look at our media and our culture regarding feedback, I wonder, most individuals in leadership positions have a hard time giving feedback. Let me show you what I mean. We're a culture where individuals recruit and select like. We do this in all different age groups, so the growth of the likes and the smiley faces and the hearts is a part of our culture. With social media, I think, actually very much shows that we're recruiting likes all the time. And now, I don't know if you know this, but you can actually find ways to improve your life. But there's also social pressure from friends and family to like everything that they are posting. It's a part of our social world. Our media shows friends support and like each other. This is a part of what we are exposed to. Alternatively, corrective feedback is seen as harsh, it's criticism, and draws our attention very differently. It draws our attention because we want to know how people handle such a feedback, or how do they handle receiving such hard feedback from these show folks. And now there's younger people, if you are watching MasterChef, and really it goes to show the level to which we're interested in how people respond. Of course, there's the American Idol and the harshest critic, and the types of feedback that they provide, and they are experts providing their ideas of how people are doing. In short, I think we kind of see corrective feedback or criticism as bullets, things that are being shot off as individuals. And as a result, there may be this general perception corrective feedback results in more of this. Or at best, corrective feedback is considered tough love, meaning someone treats another person harshly or sternly with the intent to help them in the long run. So in some ways, I think to myself, no wonder most managers don't feel comfortable providing feedback in this way. Who wants to be that person? Who wants to be the person giving tough love or crushing people, so to speak? And then I think that there are individuals who have provided feedback, and it's very possible that they may have, in those occasions, access as punishers. For example, they may have seen this type of a response. Out of curiosity, do you all hear me? Does everyone hear the speakers on my laptop? Excellent. Here's another way people may have responded to corrective feedback if someone pushed them out. Looking across these things, it's no wonder that people may have a hard time giving corrective feedback. I'm curious, how comfortable do you feel providing corrective feedback on a scale of 1 to 10? Excellent. Very cool. Wide range of responses here. Very, very cool. Let's say, to some extent, in my own research, no shit, Ellie, no wonder many supervisors feel really uncomfortable providing corrective feedback, or this is not something that they prefer to do and need some help in. In fact, Vision Arrow Reed and Hemley in 2015 found that supervisors reported feeling only somewhat prepared for their roles. And this tells me that we need to provide better support to our leadership teams and more training on how to give these tougher feedback. And I'm of the opinion that giving honest, transparent feedback is the cornerstone of building strong leaders and employees. But when I say feedback, what I mean is information about performance that's going to allow a person to change his or her behavior. I'd argue the likes and the smiley faces, and even some of the harsh criticism that we watch on television can be mistaken as feedback, but those don't lead to improvements in behavior and specify how the person should change. And so I wouldn't consider those things feedback. Feedback is meant to benefit the receiver of it. That is its function. And I think clinical supervisors give two types of feedback. The first one that I'm going to talk about, I think you're most familiar with. This is feedback on procedural integrity of things. And here you want to make your expectations clear up front and set a mastery criteria based on actual performance. And then you use a performance checklist and use behavior skills training by modeling the correct response and providing feedback about the person conducted the response correctly or not, and then monitor performance and keep track of that performance. This would be behavior skills training and looking at procedural integrity. Now, with this type of feedback, there's some research evidence that suggests that we should do it in a sandwich method. I know that there's some debate about this. So I'd like to share with you my opinion about it. The sandwich method is supposed to be that you begin with a general positive statement or an empathic statement to feedback, and then you put the good stuff in the middle. That is that you, state the things that the person did correctly and the things that they did incorrectly and how they can correct those incorrect responses. And you are to end on a general good note and leave some room for questions. Now, I think that the sandwich method gets a bad rep when the sandwich really sounds more like a cherry on top of things. People wait for the meat, and in fact, many of us now just directly go for the burger or the stuff in the middle. But if this is treated from a behavioral perspective as providing differential reinforcement, it could be a great opportunity to let the employee or the staff member know what are some of the things you'd like to see them continue to do, or some of the things that you'd like to see them keep. And I think that for those reasons, and also the abundant research that shows employees yearn to hear that they are doing a good job, or yearn to hear that when they are doing a good job, that it is noticed, I think that we could be using the sandwich method to take advantage of those opportunities to kind of say, here are some things that you are doing well. Keep at that. But even with such a structured feedback method of having a performance monitoring tool, setting a criteria and providing feedback to folks in this way, in my own research, I have found that people feel much more comfortable after they've been given some feedback on their feedback giving skills. And their skills improve after they have received such training. So some training is still needed. And when we look to see what type of errors most people made when they were doing behavior skills training at this site, it's that they were jumping right into giving corrective feedback, believe it or not, instead of putting some time to balance out and provide the corrective feedback of some of the things the person should keep. This would feel like this. This is how I think some of us have felt as employees in the past as well. So I think with behavior skills training of this type, it's necessary that we put attention in providing feedback about some of the things the person is getting correct and to continue to encourage that. How comfortable do you feel providing corrective feedback on procedural integrity, I wonder? Good, I can see for the most part, many of you are at 8 and above. Some of you provided 7. And this type of feedback, I think the individual improves by having procedural integrity forms and having performance monitoring tools that help in providing this type of feedback.
Yes.
Now, in my opinion, there's another type of feedback that a supervisor has to give for which none of us have ever been prepared for.
I don't know. She lives in West LA.
And that is tough feedback of this kind when someone is texting or they fall asleep at a meeting.
Probably in the night, I would imagine.
Process? I'm sorry, I hear some background noise as well. I see some of the panelists commenting on that.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, it looks like we have, Ellie, I don't know if you can see the list of panelists. Oh, they just went away. All right. I think somebody had called in somehow as a panelist.
Okay. It makes perfect sense for me as a technology person to be having all sorts of technology difficulties today. It sounds good. So, these are some of the things that I think we find more difficult in providing feedback about when someone's making the culture difficult or gossiping. I particularly find this one difficult when you have to kind of let the person know other people don't like them. And there's always those individuals that are really adorable, you like them a lot, but you're constantly messing up. And other tough conversations to have are things about how people dress, their communication style and communication skills, their timeliness. And I think these are difficult because at some level, we expect the person to have this in their repertoire. We expect them to have learned that these are things that they should do at a certain level when they begin work with us. And for those reasons, I think these are tougher conversations and tougher feedback to give. Let's think about this situation, for example. You have a staff member named Kimberly who is playing ball in the living room with her 5-year-old client. They're playing ball, and the ball bounces right out of view. And you turn around the corner, and you notice that Kimberly has bent down to pick up the ball, and you notice her pants are too low. How comfortable do you feel providing feedback to Kimberly on a scale of 1 to 10? Or 0 to 10? Oh, what a great range. I see all sorts of fantastic responses there. Excellent. And some people are commenting that it really depends on the relationship you've had with that staff member in the past, and I completely agree with that. Here's an example where I think that what we've been taught about feedback though really fails us. Here's what it would look like if I used the sandwich method, talking with Kimberly. Hey, Kimberly, I really, really like the color of your pants. I particularly love the color of your shirt and how you were playing ball with the client. There's some things that I think could really improve in the future. It would be great if you did not wear such low-rise pants or pants that are sagging. And let me try and model that for you so you can see what I mean. And let me just you do that right now so that I can provide you with some feedback. I think you get my point, and that is that the type of feedback we've been trained to give does not prepare us for some of the things that we end up having to do with some of our employees. And I have some tips for you from different books and different places that I've put together. And these apply both to behavior skills training and this type of feedback. First tip I have is that you want to set the expectations for corrective feedback upfront, first day when you hire people. I'd like for that to be outside of me. I'd like to provide them with a book and something to read or something to listen to that outside of me gives them some ideas about how to respond to feedback. I think 25 Essential Skills does a great job with this. For those of you who have not seen it, thanks for the feedback. It's not a behavior analyst who wrote this, Douglas Stone and Sheila Hayden, but it's a great book that really teaches the reader about the importance of leading with information from feedback for improving yourself. And recently, I have actually put together the supervision and skills work for behavior analysts. And in our handbook, we have a couple chapters on feedback and how to receive feedback and how to give feedback to each other. And I really recommend that you begin with that. The second step is that I, agree with one of the attendees who said that a good relationship is really important. You want to create a positive relationship There is a fantastic issue in BAP on supervision, and the authors make a great point about how to build good relationships. You want to get to know your employee as a whole person, and you definitely want to be a mentor and a coach and seen as one rather than a cop or someone who's out to get them. Another thing is that there's some good evidence that you want to be listening to your employees. Again, this is from the Harvard Business Review, but there's evidence that the more you listen to your employees, the better they think that you are at giving them feedback. So hearing their perspective, listening to them talk about some of the things that they're struggling with is really, really important. And then the third is to be willing and ready to have those tough conversations. We're not doing anyone any favors by avoiding them. And there's really never going to be a good time for giving such a feedback. It's never going to get easier for any of us. And, you know, I think that when we don't address such feedback, there's more risk involved. And the risk is that we will be heated and the conversation will result in everyone becoming much more defensive and look more like this. Now, I've spoken to employers in the past where they've, you know, during the conversations, they've shared with me that they had a hard time providing feedback to a particular individual. And at some point that the issue came up and they blew up. For example, in a meeting when someone was late and it really resulted in disruption. And I want to point out that if we're holding back on giving that type of feedback, it's going to creep out at some point and in some way. So we're not doing anyone any favors when we hold back, and it's better for us to have those conversations. Have some steps for having those conversations with the person, and I'd love to hear your feedback about them. I'd love to hear of examples you have that you can provide, and I'll be giving you my email address right after this presentation today. But one is that you prepare yourself for the talk that you're about to have. There is some time you need to take to think about how you will have the conversation, your judgment of the issue, and have some conversation with yourself about how you will approach and set a time and a place. The next is for you to introduce the conversation. So let's take Kimberly as an example. If I were to take step one, I may say to Kimberly, hey, Kimberly, do you have a few minutes? I'd love to talk with you, and ask that we speak privately about the issue. No one feels like you're about to have a good conversation when you're about to do that, and that's okay. And that is going to provide you just with those antecedents you need for her to attend more carefully, rather than for you to act like the conversation is going to be easy. The next step is for you to state only that which you have observed, not your judgment of it, but stick to the facts. So in Kimberly's case, you may say something like, when I came to observe you at the client's home, I noticed that when you bent down to get the ball, your pants were too low. And tie the behaviors or tie what you observe to actions that matter for the person, and really show that you care about the client's services as well as the very person that you're providing that feedback to. So with Kimberly's case, I may say something like, when people see that your pants are so low, they might question if you have had the professionalism training and or realize that you're in a client's home and that this may not be appropriate. They might question your level of maturity, and I would never want for them to do that. You want to confirm that you care about the person, and that has to be very explicit. And it may come in the form of, I'd much rather you hear that from me because I care about you. And then you would want to pose the question of, hey, what do you think about that? This moment, you would and should expect them to lose it. I think one thing that we sometimes do wrong is that we try to make the situation better by relating or saying, I know what that feels like, or by trying to elongate the conversation simply to show that we care. But really, in every one of these situations, the truth is that this is a tough conversation and it's going to be tough for the person to hear. It's tough feedback. Expect them to lose it, ask how they feel, show that you care, but be prepared to then move to some solutions and provide an action plan for the change you'd like to see. For example, you might say, I'm going to ask you to consider a few tips I use when I'm selecting pants. You may want to check to see if you need to unbutton your jeans when you need to sit down, or bend down with your pants and see if you're comfortable when you're bending down and they actually are hugging your hips. And then you can also provide even more concrete tips, such as you would want the pockets, your back pockets, to be in the middle third of your backside. And then you want to definitely set a clear expectation that things are going to change. You may say something like, next time I see you, I look forward to having this conversation, and I look forward to seeing this change so that we can move on to some of the things that I really would like to work with you on. And then I would say that these are typically the 8 steps that you would see if you were to look across the literature about how to give tough feedback. And I'm wondering, as I was going through Kimberly's case, there were many, many, many tough situations and tough conversations I've had to have with supervisees. I was thinking to myself, is this a good example of giving tough feedback? Because there's also many times when we provide tough feedback that seems quite personal, such as the person's communication skills or the fact that they don't smile or nod when people speak with them. And I wondered if you could share with me if these steps would help you in holding those constructive conversations and providing feedback. On a scale of 0 to 10, do you feel that these help you have those conversations? Excellent. I think most of you are actually saying that these are very helpful for you to be able to hold those tough conversations. And I have to say that every tough conversation has been tough for me. I find the toughest conversations can typically be around the culture of an organization, when I see that someone's behaviors or someone's regular conduct is in some ways resulting in toxicity or a bad culture. And I have to now pull them aside and have a conversation with them. And I think that those are tougher because I have to begin by finding out how they feel about the organization that they are a part of. Asking them about their job. Do they like their job? Do they like what they're doing? And beginning with those conversations to get a sense of where the person is and where some of the things that they're airing may be coming from. But I won't say it gets that much easier over time. What happens is, I think, that I have found that the individuals I hold those tough conversations with really grow. And watching that growth and seeing them change those behaviors and improve, and sometimes share with me that no one had told them, or that, you know, that they have had difficulties in other organizations or with other supervisors, but they haven't quite identified what it was, really, really has been reinforcing in my history. So much so that I find myself really enjoying giving these talks, because I'm realizing that, you know, truly employees want to hear these things from us, and then they benefit from it. Well, so I have gone through my learning objectives today, spent a little time on behavior skills training, knowing that most of the audience members would be very familiar with that. We spent some more time on how we would discuss feedback, and I've provided my notes to the organizers here, and I'm wondering if I can now entertain some questions.
Well, thank you so much, Ellie. We so appreciate this. There was a couple of questions came through, so I'll throw those out, and then folks, please feel free to continue adding to the conversation in the chat. But let's start off with somebody early on when we were still working out the technical issues. Somebody asked they'd be curious if there's a task analysis, or if Dr. Kazemi can offer a framework for each of us to develop our own. And I think you just gave us a really good framework for that with those steps. So I think that question is great. I don't know if there's anything more that you want to talk about with that. Is there more task analysis or more elaboration on that, I assume, in your forthcoming book?
Yes, and also I actually provide a little bit more time in role plays when I am doing in-person talks, and I have leading conversations for those very steps, because I found that people benefit from using some opening words to the sentence, so that they can just get their words out there and start having those tough conversations. I have a few of those workshops coming up, and I'm happy to share with you if you'd like some of those, the tables I have for that. But like I said, we do those in role plays, and I think most people benefit from hearing themselves try to do these out loud.
Oh, for sure. All right. Let's see, when you were showing the slide with the 6% of people are good at giving feedback, somebody asked, what kind of metric were they using to label good feedback?
So on that Mercer survey that they did, it was a question where they asked, was your supervisor good at giving you feedback? Similar ones have been done in clinical psychology. I've seen similar ones in the field of school psychology. And for the most part, most supervisees will report that their supervisors were not very good at giving feedback. It was either too harsh or not descriptive or helpful in telling them what to do better. But there isn't some kind of a well-done metric system for that. It's usually just a question of, was your supervisor good at this?
And we have a comment in the chat that's interesting, that they're using opinions rather than effects on behavior. But that's often the case with survey research, I think. Don't you think?
Absolutely. I think one of the more interesting studies was done by Reed and Parsons, and that's why we replicated it. And that is to have kind of taught this participants the very behavior that they wanted them to provide feedback on to their supervisees. In Reed and Parsons' case, it was, I think, differential reinforcement and carrying out a program plan. In our case, it was conducting different preference assessments. And we found that when we looked at baseline, really most people could give feedback at what we considered about 20 to 30% effectiveness. Now, how do I measure that? I measure that using a performance monitoring tool with all of the things that I mentioned earlier. Do they provide some corrective feedback, and then do they explain to the person how to correct it? Do they also identify things that the person did right? Do they leave room for questions and answer questions? And so I have all of these in the performance monitoring tool, and so do Reed and Parsons. And we find that most people will begin somewhere around 20 to 30, and when they have the skills in their repertoire, they only get better at about 50 or 60%. It's when they're given feedback on giving feedback, so that they're working on their feedback giving skills, that they really achieve 80 to 90% on those types of performance monitoring tools.
It's so interesting. And of course, somebody else mentioned in the chat that our social validity measures are opinions as well. So it's not to say opinions don't matter, because oftentimes they do. But when we're working with the ability to improve the effectiveness, like you just mentioned, from 20% to up to 80%, of course, it makes so much sense to go ahead and improve what we can, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. We had another question about what's the best way to provide feedback up to supervisors? And so I assume this person's talking about their a supervisee providing feedback up to their supervisor, which is so difficult.
I completely agree. That's an excellent question. In the study I mentioned, what we did was we outlined what our expectations were of the supervisor giving feedback. So we had in there an item with, you begun with an empathic statement and recognized some of the things that the person brought in for the day. And we also included, like I said, that they caught, collected data and caught things that the person did correct, and balanced the feedback such that they provided feedback about both things that the person did correctly as well as things that they needed to improve upon. And I found that supervisors at the beginning would use that performance monitoring tool for themselves, sort of like a task analysis when they were providing feedback. Of course, we were watching them give feedback, so, they wanted to get it right and they were using those tools. But I think it also goes to show us that, we would benefit from having reminders and having a checklist of, what are some of the things that I need to point out. And I think the supervisors will benefit from having those, and someone who's watching using such a tool to provide them with feedback on their feedback giving skills.
So interesting. Very cool. Let's see. Those were the questions that came up. I think we have a few more minutes if folks have any additional questions that they want to put in the chat box for us while we're seeing if something comes in. Okay, here is one. Our organization has clinical trainings every 2 weeks, but some supervisors are lacking the professionalism part. I'm creating a professionalism leadership training for our supervisors, and they are wondering if there's an existing training structure or schedule she can use and references.
On professional training, I'm afraid I can't think of any. I know that at CSUN we also provide those, and I usually use the 25 essential skills and go through and explain the implications of unprofessional conduct. I use examples, for example, from medical schools and what we see across other professions, our sister and brother professions and mental health. But I'm not familiar with any specific guide outside of the 25 essential skills or any specific program.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And I know your notes that we will give out to the participants have a reference list as well. So that is forthcoming. And somebody asked earlier, would they get a copy of the slides? And so we will, what we usually do is about a week from now, we'll put up a recording. I assume we will cut out the technical difficulties, but we'll put up a recording, and Dr. Kazemi has given us a notes PDF, which is essentially the slide content. So we'll make those things available to you, and that does include a reference list. And let's see.
Through after a bunch of technical difficulties.
Yeah. Let's see. We have a question about, do we have some guidance on conversations around releasing employees from employment? What a tactful way to say that.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I fully understood the question. You're saying a tactful way to essentially fire someone?
I believe that is the question. How to fire someone nicely, exactly.
Got it, okay. How do you fire someone nicely? I think that firing someone nicely means that you have had the relationship with them where in the past you've provided them with opportunities to correct behaviors. I'm assuming that this is maybe someone that you've asked them to take some corrective actions. You may have given them some feedback and have provided them with some guidelines about how to improve, but maybe they haven't. The only other circumstances I can think of is someone whose fraction or whose conduct is either injurious or harmful to themselves or the clients and those around them. And I think in the first case, I think that in my experience, most people know that they're being fired when they have met with you 2 to 3 times for corrective actions, and you're kind of responding to them with, I'm still looking for these things, and I'm still not seeing any improvement, and I'd like to see some by this date. And I think that that's really as nice as you can be, is to have had some record of the person's conduct, to have kept it objective, and to have given them opportunities to improve. And the other, which is conduct that may be of harm to them, I think that if we look at some of the literature around firing, and again, this is from human resource literature, I really recommend that we begin to look at some of that literature for some of these issues and get some human resource help with some of these issues. And in that case, it really is usually around making the implications of the conduct pretty clear for the client. Your function for the meeting is client care, or your purpose is the best quality you can provide, and explaining that you're not an appropriate match at this time. But I really don't have much more than that to offer. That's not an area I would say expertise in. I haven't quite fired that many people that didn't want to be fired.
Yeah, that's such a tough one.
Know it's coming.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really important point, is that if you're doing objective and kind feedback the way you talked about in this presentation, then if it's not working, this stuff that you've presented to us today lays the groundwork for firing people nicely. I mean, ideally, it lays the groundwork for improvement, so you don't have to fire people. But if you're doing everything that Dr. Kazemi describes here, then they should not be surprised at that point. They should have had good feedback, objective, kind, caring feedback. And, I think if you continue that through the conversation that lets people go, then it's probably about as good as it's going to get.
I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a couple of questions about where folks can get a hold of your stuff, I think. First of all, there was a question earlier about your book and the release date, and it looks like that's November 28th. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. I did wonder what that was. I could see it from the sidelines, and I thought to myself, someone was responding to, hey, do you have a moment? Can we set a date and time to talk about this? And I thought someone just got ready for that day. I was like, okay.
No, we were talking about because you put up your book, and I put up a link to the book, and we were looking for that release date. So I think people were excited about it. And I just wanted to confirm that.
Thank you, Christine, for that. Yeah.
Oh, of course. And then somebody asks where they can find information about where your next talks will be, your live presentations.
That's a good question. I plan to put those on my website. I'm quite excited to, my son is now 19 and he's in Oslo, and I have plenty more time to be attending conferences, and I'm really excited to be able to give some more talks this year. So I have quite a few coming up. I'm happy to put those up on my lab website, which you can find by actually just Googling me, or you can go to www.csun.edu. And actually, I'm going to just put that in the chat box right here because it's held at
Oh, that'd be great.
Oh, I think I just sent that to only panelists. So I'm going to make sure it's to everyone. And I'll make sure to post my upcoming talk there. That's very sweet.
There you go. Yeah, that should have gone to everybody. Well, excellent. And then also, while we're doing some housekeeping things here, I'm going to pop in some of the things I mentioned at the beginning, how to get a hold of us, where the next webinar and past webinars are. So I know I promised that to folks. Let's see. Do we have any final questions for Dr. Kazemi? See if anything pops up here real quick. And if not, well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing this information with us. I know it's such an important part of what we do, but also it's easy to let it slide when we're focusing on clients. So it's great for you to take the time to remind us how important this is and how to do it well.
Well, thank you so much for hosting. Thanks, everyone. I really want to thank you for sticking through. I was seeing everyone's response about what to do. I could see everyone was trying to problem solve with me in the midst of things. That was so sweet to see. People were telling me, unplug this, do that. And I deeply appreciated it. This was my first webinar in this forum. That was a lesson, but I really, really, really appreciated the support.
Yes, we appreciate it too, and thank you so much to our attendees for hanging in here with us as much as you could, and trying to help out so much. Well, we appreciate it, and folks are saying thank yous, and rightly so. Thank you so much, Dr. Kazemi, for doing this for us. And I think we are done with the Q&A, so unless you have something else you want to add, we'll let you go and with our thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, I see one last question here about CEUs. We will send out a survey that will ask you for your certificate number to collect that information from you. So we'll send that out to everybody who was present for the event, and we'll then send you back your CEU once we have that information. Thanks for asking that. And you're welcome. All right, we are going to sign off, and we will see you next month with Dr. Becca Tagg.